I love your
And then,
story and what you're doing. So thank you for taking a minute out.
no, absolutely. No, I'm glad to be here.
So are you in Beverly Hills now?
No, I'm actually in Seattle now.
Oh, you're in Seattle. Okay. So
Yeah.
this was okay. So we'll get into all of that. I one of my favorite podcasts when I really started getting my head wrapped around what was out there. There was a show that I was listening to called Here Be Monsters. And it's
Uh-huh.
just really interesting, eclectic stories. The guy that does it has a really great voice and great way of telling stories. And the latest one that he put out, he went to Berlin, and I think he's living there now. And he ran into a hairdresser that was cutting somebody's hair that had cancer for the final time and recorded it. And it was totally trippy and gripping. And I'm just thinking about your stories and what you went through. And the guy that he was cutting the hair for used to be a rock and roll dude, kind of punk rock, and just explaining how weak he was, but he just wanted to have one final haircut because I think he only had a very short window of living. But it was such a wild podcast. I mean, you could hear the clippers, you could hear the razor, the whole thing, the
Yeah.
conversation, and it was wild, man. So when I saw your podcast, it took me back to that. I'm thinking how cool it is that we have podcasts to like talk about these stories because otherwise, how are people going to hear these stories?
Well, that was one of the things that my wife would always tell me. Like when she first met me, she was like, real people don't talk like you.
Yeah,
I'm like, yeah, I hear you. I mean, she's from Seattle. I'm from LA. I moved up here, and, she would hear some of the stories that my best friend and I would tell, and then during COVID, he would be on our iPad in the kitchen. He could see my son for the very first time, and my wife would be like, "Hey, tell me something funny about your guys' adventures back in LA." And then all these kind of stories kind of started flooding back to us.
yep,
And then it was like, she's like, "You guys got to write this stuff down." And I'm
yep.
like, "Whoa, here's the thing." I'm like, "I'm dyslexic and he's a stammerer." I'm like, the book would be one page. It'd be and that's it. So for him to kind of come out of his shell and actually do this, and of course the editing helps a lot as well too.
Yeah,
But for him to actually kind of come out of his shell, go through and actually put his voice out there, and then we're just kind of like recanting all these stories that we remember over the past like 20 some odd years of working in LA. Because he's in
yeah,
Denver now. I'm in Seattle. We all have a expiration date for Los Angeles, and like 40 something was for us.
yeah.
We're like, we're done.
Shelf life, yeah, for sure.
Everyone
Yeah,
has a shelf life, especially in LA.
yeah, yeah. I
And
can.
so we just started telling the stories, and clients are like, and people are like, there's no way these are true. I'm like, there's no way we can make this stuff up.
Yeah,
There's absolutely no way we can make this stuff up. And just the stories that you hear, but then only that, the people that sit into your chair and that you meet along the way. It's like sometimes you could be just walking into the waiting room and sitting down with a cup of coffee, and you might be sitting next to Ringo Starr and have no idea he was there with his wife,
yeah,
Barbara,
yeah,
while
yeah,
she was getting her color done.
yeah,
And the next thing you know, you start talking about like the street light or how the signal's not working. And you almost got ran over on the street, and just, and it's like, what do you talk about? I'm like, you talk about the flowers that you planted for
yeah,
spring
yeah,
and
yeah.
things like that. And, the next thing you know, they tell you a story about something that you did not expect at all, So
The other day, two things I'm thinking about immediately, and then we'll kind of, I mean, this is a part of what we're doing here. But the other day, I was in the seat, and I was getting my hair cut. We go to a barber college. My son has has this love of wanting to be as bald as he can, and he's 20 and he's on the autism spectrum. So we've
yeah.
kind of slowly graduated to a point where he's getting the shaving cream and getting the straight edge, and he loves it. So I'm going on ahead. I used to just go to a regular barber shop in town. Well, I'm going there now, and the guy the other day that was cutting my hair is wonderful, and we always talk the whole time. And he told me that he was in an Aldi. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri, in a little town north that I grew up in called Liberty, and Eric Stone Street was in an Aldi shopping, and I'm like, what? Are you talking about Modern Family? He was like, yeah. So he like looks at him and says, "Are you Eric Stone Street?" And he was like, "Yeah." And they start talking, and he gives him his barber card. I guess he has a house because he's from Kansas City, so he's got a house up in my hometown of where I grew up in Kansas City. But it's those stories, like he's just telling me they were hanging out. He had 3 or 4 kids. He drove into the back with his Range Rover, came in and shopped, and he was gone. And it was like those little vignettes of story that you get while you're in the barber chair. It's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you never know.
Yeah.
You never know who's going to sit in your chair, and it's like, especially being in Seattle now, I'll get everything from like Kraken players to Seahawk players to to people who are heads up in like Microsoft or doing the head of PR for Microsoft,
Yeah.
or Amazon, and they're telling you like weird stories that are kind of happening, like, and then you're kind of sitting back going like, okay, how did this get all the way into my chair?
Yes.
And so it's really, but then the everyday stuff that happens inside the salon
Yeah.
that people would never even think about, like the shit we talk about in the back room,
Yep.
and clients are like, that really happens. Like, oh yeah, it does happen,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I mean, the girls that I work with, girls are worse than boys.
Yeah.
We think our locker room talk is bad. Go work with a bunch of women.
Oh, I believe it. I believe it.
They are the worst. You know what I mean? So, when people are like, "You're this actually happens," I'm like, if you know how many penises I've seen where the girls are like, "Hey, this guy I slept with," and I'm like, "Whoa, whoa,
Yeah.
whoa,
Yeah.
hang
No,
on a
thank
second. No, thank you. No,
you.
thank you."
It proves the adage that truth is stranger than fiction. You know?
Yes.
I mean, there's no way, like you said, you can make this up. It's just it's wild. Um, so I'm curious to start at kind of the alpha here. How much of living through COVID is reverberated into your work and what you do in your life today?
You want to what? Oh God, that was the weirdest, strangest time, with
Yeah.
COVID because everyone was wearing a mask. I never thought I'd have to learn how to go do hair around a mask.
Uh-huh.
Because everything that we do revolves around your face. And if I can't see your face, how am I supposed to give you a haircut that matches you?
Yeah.
So I was actually doing consultations with a picture off their phone,
Wow.
which was really odd.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you got to take a selfie and bring it in and show me your selfie. And then we can talk about, what we're going to do with your hair. But then not only that, the string that went around the ear, I had to have a technique where I had to comb and pull the hair out from underneath.
Uh-huh.
So I actually get it right. And it still never was balanced out perfectly.
Yeah.
But at least they were coming in to get a haircut. But I think they just wanted to feel normal.
Yeah.
That's what it was they wanted to come in, they just wanted to feel normal. And now it's like people still come in with masks every now and again. It's not that often
Yeah.
that they do, but they still want to, some people want to be safe
Yeah.
because they have like children or, elderly parents at home or something like that. And I don't mind, but at least I can get around it now.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know how to, but I never thought that a day would come to where we would have to go through and work around a mask and be so careful around each other and be at distance. But then I'm getting really close,
Yeah.
and I have a child at home. My son was born on March 4th, 2020.
Wow.
So I had to be like extra careful, I thought,
Yeah.
because we didn't know what could happen, with him if I brought it home or, so of course we were afraid.
Yeah.
So I was like either double masking. I mean, my hands were so dry and cracked from all the sanitizer and
Oh
everything,
man. Yeah.
and then I wore glasses. And so I had to find a defogger for my glasses so I could actually do the hair because it would always get steamed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a bad thing when you're trying to do someone's hair when you can't see anything.
Yeah.
And you take your glasses off and still can't see anything.
Yeah, right, exactly.
you know?
So did you always want to cut hair? How did this happen? Take me back to your childhood. What were the seeds planted that has grown into who you are?
My mom's a hairdresser. I grew up in the industry. I grew up around hairdressers inside of her salon. And it was just one of those things where I would go to the hair shows with her. And I remember one time sitting there going like, you want to know what? That's what I think I'm going to do. I went to college and my dyslexia was so bad and undiagnosed that I was having so much trouble reading. And of course, I was just told, well, you're just the stupid kid.
Yeah.
Right. And I was actually told that by a couple of teachers, and I'm an 80s kid. So, of course, that's
Yep.
what happens back in the 80s and the 90s.
Yep.
So after I saw the hair show, I saw these guys doing hair up on stage. I'm like, that looks really cool. Little did I know within 4 years after watching that, I would be one of those guys on stage doing hair
Yeah.
with this company, with the guys that I was watching. And that is the course that I took. I went from San Diego, moved to Dallas, Texas to work for this company. And they're actually the ones that created Bedhead in that product line.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that changed the way all guys wore their hair,
Uh-huh.
and then also women as well, though, too, because Britney Spears was wearing the little catwalk, half cut t shirt everywhere.
Yeah.
That was a Bedhead product,
Yeah.
so it went globally wild. So the next thing you know, I was on an airplane flying around doing shows I think I did it in at least 20 different countries. So it was one of those things where it was just like you were on a plane, I would be in Chile one weekend, and literally one time I was in Santiago, Chile. I got a phone call. I needed to fly home and be in Canada by the very next day. So I had crossed the equator, landed in LA, literally changed all my gear, and then flew up that night into Vancouver. So trust me, talking about some serious jet lag and trying to do hair.
Yeah.
That was
Absolutely.
kind of a weird, but it was just one of those things where it was like it just kind of fell into my lap. I
Yeah.
didn't think I'd be working, and I never worked at my mom's hair salon ever. Everyone's like, "Oh, you should have worked with your mom," and I'm like, I call her. I lovingly call my mom's hair salon God's waiting room,
Yeah.
because it's all the little blue haired ladies, you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
you had a grandma every time you walked in, which was amazing,
Yeah.
and I loved her shop, but that's not the direction I wanted to take my career into. So
Yeah.
I went into a complete different direction, ended up working with like manufacturers and large hair care companies, and then from there moved my way into LA. So I became an educator first, and then from there took my skills and then brought them to Los Angeles. And from there, I worked for like 12 years. And then I really started meeting some interesting people.
So, what did you learn about yourself through that time? I mean, obviously, you found the profession you love. You're around interesting people, but you're a human being with a soul. What did you ultimately learn about yourself through this process of growing in the industry?
I would say that, oh, that's a really tricky question. You know what I mean? Because there's been a lot of things that I have been through in my life,
Yeah,
and a lot of it I had to learn later on in life. So I would say one of the things that I learned later on was how to go through and not compare myself,
yeah,
not care what other people thought of me.
yeah,
It wasn't important, and not think of what other people thought of me. One of the worst things I've ever done, and my best friend, Jack, my co-host, one of the worst things we ever do is Google ourselves and the people that we did,
yeah,
because people have a comment about the hair that you did and how terrible you are as a person, and it gets to you.
yeah.
Those comments kind of get to you, and then you have to start to think. Funny enough, I was at my barbershop one time getting my hair cut, and I was doing Drew Lock, who used to be the backup quarterback for the Seahawks,
He's
and I
from
gave.
He's from the town I'm in Lee Summit. He graduated from the high school in the town I'm from.
He did, yes. We actually, yes, great guy, by the way.
Yeah, totally. I can tell.
Great guy. I did him and his wife's hair for years while they were here in Seattle, and I gave him a new haircut, kind of changed things up. And I Googled it, and someone was just trash talking me on Reddit. And of course, my barber goes, "Well, let me ask you a question." He was like, "Did he like his haircut?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Did he pay for it?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What's the problem?"
Yeah,
He goes, "This guy is probably living in his mom's basement, who's probably never even been to a game. You know what I mean? He's
uh-huh.
trash talking you." So I think one of the biggest things for me was like, who's your competition?
Hmm.
Yourself.
Yeah,
You're your worst competition.
yeah,
It's like don't try to go through and, have this idea around inside your head who other people expect you to be,
yeah. What a
you
great
know.
answer. Yeah, that's such a great answer. So I'm curious. Obviously, you mentioned Ringo Starr and Drew Lock, and you probably ran into a lot of different celebrity types. But I'm curious, who was somebody that would come in that you connected with that you always look forward to talking to in the chair?
Oh, you want to know what? There was two people actually that I really, really enjoyed. One was Robert Downey Jr.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
People say I get Iron Man. I work in a school district. I'm an IT tech.
yeah,
I get that all the time.
yeah.
It's wild. Yeah, anyway.
He is when I met him after everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Once he was sober.
Yeah.
And I would do him and his son's hair, and every time he came in, what a really interesting person. The man has must have lived 5 lives in one
Yeah.
lifetime. And every time he came in, he was always just the sweetest person, the nicest person, and just chilled out. Even when I would cut his son's hair, he would sit on the floor next to us and hold his hand son while I was cutting his hair,
That's cool.
just to spend more time with him, just be with him because he's missed out on a lot, but true, a really true person, and he didn't forget his past, and he let you know it. He knew where he came from, and what he had done, and he was there to give back
Yeah.
always. But I would say him and James Spader. James Spader was probably one of the most interesting characters I've ever done.
Yeah.
Truly, though, was interested and it would hang on every single word when you had a conversation with him.
Yeah.
He wasn't one of those type of actors that just blew you off, was on his phone all the time, did not care. I would go to his house to do his hair, and every time I went in, he would bring up something that we spoke about previously, researched it to continue the conversation a month later.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my God, you really paid attention to every single detail and everything that we said. And I think that's why his career has spanned for so long, in the industry, and I would probably say that those two were probably two of my favorite people that I actually did do because they actually paid attention and they
Yeah.
actually cared.
They were human. You know, James Spader has the most interesting delivery. Every time I still see him in a role, I really just wait because he is the king of pausing and getting it out and delivering it in such a way that you'll remember. I don't know if he was taught that in acting school or if someone around him, but he just feels like he has this level of meter and rhyme and the way he puts things out that is so alluring to listen to.
It really is. So I don't know. I mean, we never got that
Yeah,
far. Once he started doing Blacklist, I'd already moved on. He had moved to New York part of the time to go through and record. So I didn't, we didn't get that deep because normally when I go through and we talk to people, especially at the salon, everyone wants to know about like, oh, hey, what was this song about? Or how they go through and come up with this. I'm like, I
yeah,
didn't talk about that.
yeah,
Like
right.
with Drew, we talked about like good food and barbecue.
Yeah,
We didn't talk, we did talk about games. We did talk about certain things, you know what I mean, that I would not talk about now. You know what I mean? Just because it's like there is certain level of anonymity,
yeah,
that comes with sitting in my chair, with certain people. But then there's a lot of things that people would not care about me talking about. But having said that, though, 9 times out of 10, we're just talking about like, hey,
yeah.
you tried the special over at Coral Tree Cafe?
Uh-huh.
Man, I had their salmon there the other day and it was so freaking good.
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about.
Just
Not about because they want to feel normal when they
yeah,
sit in your chair. And I think that's the reason I get the stories that I get
yeah,
is because when you come in, you sit down with me, there's a sense of normalcy and there's no judgment when you sit down. Every single person is a regular person as soon as you sit in my chair, and I'm there to go through and solve a problem. Whether it be your hair is too long or someone messed up your hair and we have to go through and fix it. But here's the thing, I'm fixing a problem for you. So now when I do fix that problem, you put your trust into me. The next thing you know, I find that you're asking me different questions, whether it be like, hey, I just moved to the area. I need a new dentist. I need a new doctor. Where are you going to? Or I need new restaurants I need to go to. I'm new to the area. Or I'll have people who completely have their faith in me and they're telling me about their children, the problems that they're having with that, or they'll tell me something funny that they might not tell somebody else. I know about divorces before they happen.
oh yeah,
I mean, I know about things that you would not normally tell your doctor,
yeah,
sometimes your therapist,
yeah,
but
yeah.
you get some of the wildest stories sometimes out of people where you're like, I did not expect that to happen or come out of your mouth.
So you've been in a position where people will remember your haircut and say, that was the best haircut I ever got. What about you? Who gave you a haircut in your life that you walked away and said, that's one of the best haircuts I've ever gotten?
Oh gosh, you want to know what? That's a tough one because I've had so many, like I've been around so many like really good hairdressers
Yeah.
that I like a lot of my haircuts. You know
Okay.
what I mean? So that's the nice part of it. So I'd
Yeah.
hate to say like,
Sure.
but it's funny because even my barber, he gets every third one right. Depends on if he's like high or not.
Right.
You
That's what I'm
know,
saying.
it's like when I go into his shop, it's like walking into the movie barber shop. And it is such a blast. But I'm like, ooh, did you smoke a little too much already? But it's a fun time, you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
sometimes he gets it, and I'm like, dude, this was a good haircut. And then one time he cut it, and you know, I my best friend looks at me and goes, "You look like a thumb," because it was hysterical, and we laughed for about 20 minutes. I've never been called a thumb before, probably the
That's
best thing ever, But that's one of the things. It's like you have to go through and be able to laugh at yourself,
yeah.
And I have clients now that fly in to have their hair done,
That's awesome.
which is kind of amazing. I have people come up from California. There's one girl who sees me every 8 weeks. She flies in,
Wow.
and I've been doing her hair for almost 28 years now. I mean, I remember when she got pregnant. Her daughter, I just talked to her daughter the other day. She's in college in Florida,
That's so cool.
and it's like you build these relationships with people, and then you hear like everything.
Yeah.
But then they also hear things about me. She knows my whole life story as well after 28 years.
Yeah.
She's seen me grow up and actually become an adult. I don't think I was an adult until I was in my 40s, personally.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's seen me kind of go through everything. I've been there when her mother passed away. She was there when my father passed away, and you have these relationships with people, and I think that's one of the things that we want to come out with this podcast, so that way people can kind of hear some of the things that we do talk about. Like one of the things I want to talk about pretty soon is my mother is part of a attorney contacted me about a lawsuit against the color companies because they're starting to find out that when you go through and you mix the peroxide with actual color, the carcinogens from there are cancerous. And my mom's a three-time cancer survivor.
Oh,
And
wow.
I'm actually going to go through and talk about that with one of their attorneys on our podcast, and then more likely bring my mom in on this as well. So we can talk to other hairdressers about the dangers of what is kind of happening and how these color companies are taking advantage of the misinformation that's been going out and that we don't know about.
Yeah.
So, that is one of the other things that we want to kind of get out there as well. Yeah, there's going to be some funny stuff with it, because you have to laugh. And that's why I think, putting yourself out there, you have to laugh at yourself, but there's also some serious stuff,
Yeah.
but you have to approach it with a very positive attitude because if you don't, you know, I don't know, for some reason to me, if you live in that negativity or things are always going wrong, things don't go right for people like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's why we want to kind of go through and get a lot of this information out and talk about it. And my mom is now she'll be 81 this summer. I mean, three times with cancer. That's an amazing feat,
That is. Yeah. That is
So
amazing. So, how have you balanced this out throughout the years? You know, you're hearing stories. There's almost a level of you that's a psychologist and a therapist as well. You're going through all of these stories, but you have a profession, you have a craft that you have to take care of. How have you balanced that out? And along with taking care of yourself, your family, your soul, your needs, what's been that balancing act for you?
I have a good therapist and
Okay.
I don't take anything to heart.
Yeah.
You can only go through and give as much as you give. So people will go through and that is one of the things that I have actually I've heard from a lot of hairdressers is that, they get really brought down from all of the therapy that they're giving, and you have to go through and be like, okay, every single person that sits in my chair can only give so much.
Yeah.
And then a lot of times I say, hey, you want to know what? You need to speak to a therapist. This sounds like something that, you need with a therapist. Some people will go through, and let me tell you, so some of the things that I've gone through, I don't mind helping people and kind of giving some of my advice, but at the exact same time, I'm like, oh, you want to know what? This is getting pretty deep.
Yeah.
So you have to know where the cutoff is. you
Yeah.
know, to find that separation, you know, and a lot of times you also have to know on how to go through and segue back to their hair,
Yeah. Yes.
you know, and that way it's like, you know how to go through and kind of just be a little gentle and quiet and kind of move the direction, that conversation in a completely different direction from that point. But I think and you can't bring it home.
Yeah.
You know, my wife's a school teacher and she brings a lot of things home,
Yeah.
you know, and that really gets to you. And it really gets to the family as well, too,
Yeah.
you know, until she actually can go through, learn how to go through and kind of put a pin in it and be like, I can't bring this home because I hear some stories that are just tragic, you know, or someone who I've been cutting their hair for a very long time and their wife comes in during their appointment time for me to do their hair. And I'm like, hey, what happened to Harry? You know, and she was like, I need to be the one that tells you that he passed away, you know, and it's hard.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you've been doing this person's hair for like 10 years and all of a sudden they're just gone. And they haven't told you about the extent of their cancer or the extent of whatever it is that they have with them. And, you know, she's like, he went peacefully, but I just wanted to come in and be the one to tell you, you know, and you're like, that's cool. I really appreciate that you came and told me because sometimes you don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, one time we had one girl who would always miss appointments, and her father was paying for her missed appointments. We charge for every missed appointment. And one day she just, you know, had her blow dries all kind of set up, and we charged her for it and called her, didn't hear, didn't reschedule. And then one of her best friends comes in and goes, by the way, I need to tell you, we lost her about a month ago. And I went, wait a minute, we just charged a dead person for a missed appointment.
Yeah.
You know, I was like that. You know, I kind of looked at the staff and I'm like, just take everything off, take the credit card information off. Won't do that again.
Yeah.
But it was like, whoa, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, and I felt terrible, but at the exact same time, I'm like, what do you do? Reverse the charges? You know what I mean? I'm like,
Yeah.
we didn't know.
For sure. How long did it take for you to detox from being in that adrenaline atmosphere of LA to going up to Seattle? Was there a period where you had to readjust your mind and profession of where you were?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I had to relearn how to do hair. You know, it took me a couple of years because the weather is so different, you
Yeah.
know, and the people are very different. And, you know, like I was saying before, my wife would always say, like, you don't talk like normal people talk, you know, but they wanted my expertise from living in LA and California, you know what I mean? But I don't think the people here wanted all what they call the name dropping
Yeah.
or things like that, you know, but people don't realize for people like us in LA, name dropping is our currency because
Yeah.
a lot of these celebrities don't pay for their hair.
Right.
We don't get paid for it. So what we do is we tell people who we've done, you know, so that way, who are you going to put your trust in? You're going to put your trust in the person that takes care of people who are seen on television or in, you know, in movies, or you can put your trust in the new kid you haven't met before.
Yeah.
So of course we use that. That's our currency to other people. It's like, well, if they trust you, then I trust you with my hair.
Yeah.
And that way you get the CEOs of different companies coming in and things like that. You know, but for me, it took about, I would say a good like 3 years to
Wow.
kind of get used to how Seattle reacted towards me. Or, I mean, I even going in and getting these glasses, you know, I walked into my favorite place where I would go and buy my frames, and the woman pulls out 10 pairs, and I literally took seven and pushed them aside. I said, absolutely not. I'll look at these three.
Yeah.
And she goes, where are you from? You're so matter of fact. You know what you want.
Yeah.
You know, and I love that about me. And my clients are like that as well, though, too. I like about myself. Like, I know what I want. I don't want to waste anybody's time.
Yeah.
You know, when someone sits in my chair, they show me a picture and they go, this is what I want. Great, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
You know, let's just cut right through all of it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, I think, how I am still. And, but the thing about Seattle, though, I feel like I'm halfway retired,
Gotcha.
even though I'm here working full time.
Yeah.
You know, everybody here is just, it's a very laid back type of atmosphere. You know, I remember during 9/11, so many New Yorkers moved to California to kind of get away from everything that was happening. And I
Uh,
get it. My best friend one of my best friends lives in New York, and the stories that you hear are horrific. One of the things I always told people, the New Yorkers that came over, I said, listen, you don't pull your wallet out until they tell you how much the coffee is. And they like, I know it drives me crazy. You know what I mean? now New Yorkers are moving to Seattle, for the jobs that have been created here. And I tell them, you don't pull your coffee out until you talk to your barista, they pet your dog, they
Yep.
get you a treat.
That's right.
I'm like, it's a different way of life.
Yeah.
And everyone tells me, yeah, I'm here to go through and cash out, work for Amazon for a couple of years. I'm 2 years, I'm out. I'm really retired. 9 years later, they're still here because their kids are doing so well in college or
Yep.
in high school, in school or whatnot. They're off going to college,
Yeah.
because it's a great place to live,
Yeah. Totally.
and it's not this whole like having to be seen all the time or be part of the scene or the right restaurant, the right nightclub, or, you know, I remember one of my bosses back in LA told me, he says, no, Jason, you can never be too rich, too skinny, or too tan. I'm like, oh, if that statement doesn't sum up LA,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It was
Yep.
like, wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, cool. Well, I'll be fine over here with my $10, Target sandals. I'm fine.
Yeah. That's right. That's
You
right.
know?
So, of all of these adventures you've been through, all of the geography and all of the emotional platitudes and everything you've accomplished and involved into, what are you the proudest of?
Okay, you want to know what this is going to sound really, really odd, but when my father was in the hospital one day, he was anemic and he fell down, he hit his head, and I was in LA and I drove down to San Diego to be with him in the hospital, and he was talking to his nurse about me. And he was telling her of all the things that I've done and what I'm doing right now. And I have never been more happy or more proud because how proud my dad felt about me at that moment. While we're sitting there and he's hurting and he's like, but he wasn't up talking about himself. He was talking to the nurse about me. And look what my son has done. This is what he does. And that was probably one of the moments that I'll never forget. He didn't like everything that I did. I mean, probably one of the funniest things, I've showed him some of my editorial work, and he was like, God, that's probably the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my entire life. And I could not stop laughing. I mean, it was like my best friend and I were just like listening to my father saying how god awful our work was, but he was proud of me at that time in that moment. And I think that was probably one of the happiest days of my life.
You know, my dad, when he passed in '08. My whole family went up and saw him at the hospital. And I didn't quite know. I don't know what happened, but I didn't go up there. But I was literally the first person that went in the room after he passed, and I saw him. I was trying to process it all, and there was a male nurse. He was an African fella, and he said, "Are you the one that went to Italy?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he was like, "Your dad was just talking about you tonight, talking about your travels." So when you said that, it really like strummed that chord because I totally get it. I didn't expect it, and I was the first person to see him right after he left this planet and to hear that he had said. So I get it, man. There's something right there that is like all of these things that we do in our lives, no matter how much we try to avoid it, we want a level of validation for what we've done and who we are. And to have the actual person that has been the towering influence, like talk about it. It's pretty cool, man.
Who was your first hero? My father was mine.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I
It,
mean?
yeah.
So when your hero in your head and who you set is like this biggest thing of your life says something like that about you,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's like, to me, it was like mind blowing. You know what I mean? I thought like, wow, my dad's like, because he never really said things like that to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was born in 1928. He's a
Yeah.
depression baby. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they kept everything close to their chest,
Yeah.
and when you see your father going through and like beaming about you,
Yeah.
you're like, wow, that was like, so everything that I have done in my career, I would give back to have that moment again,
Totally. That's
you
great.
know?
I totally dig it. So let me ask you this. Everyone has a perception of you, family, friends, clients, colleagues, everyone that knows you, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I know me very well, and I'm not that cool. I'm definitely, everyone's like, oh, you've done this. And I'm like, that's pretty cool. I'm like, yeah, I guess. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But I think my perception of myself, I would say I'm like this insecure guy, you know what I mean, that got lucky,
Yeah,
and I consider myself lucky every single day, that's for sure. You
yeah,
know, I wake up in a warm house, I have a loving wife, I have a loving son, and I'm like, I I can go down my whole gratitude list and I do every single day my meditations, you know what I mean? So, you know, if anything, I'm just lucky to be my son's father,
yeah. I
and
dig
so
it.
I love that, So me, I don't know. I'm just, some guy living life in Seattle having fun. And I'm lucky to have a lot of fun, and I get together with my best friend every single week and we tell stories and we probably laugh more than we actually record,
Yeah,
and I'm lucky to have that, you know. And they pay me for it now, you know what I mean? That's kind of funny, you know what I mean? I'm like, they're like, here's some money. And I'm like, wow, cool.
yeah.
So I'm like, because even my best friend, he was like, they're paying us for this. I said, yeah. And he goes, who wants to pay for this crap? And I'm like, I know. I was like,
So, Shit I Told My Hairdresser is the podcast. If anyone wants to tune in, all major platforms, it's out there.
yep,
If anyone wants to reach out, anything more in your world, where's the best place for them to go?
just go straight to our website at shititoldmyhairdresser.com
Okay.
and you can send us an email from there.
I love it. Jason, this has been so refreshing. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your stories. It's been wonderful, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Joe. Have a great day.
Yes, sir. You too. Take care. Hello, friends. Joe Dimino here. I just wanted to let you know that after 30 years or so, I have finally released my first book of poetry through the mighty Spartan Press here in Kansas City, Missouri. As the creator and host of both Neon Jazz Radio and the Famous Interviews with Joe Dimino podcast, along with being a visual artist, I'm ready to embark on a new adventure and want you to be a part of it. You can get a copy online via Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and actually on the streets in Kansas City at the great Prospero's bookstore off 39th Street. You can also visit joedimino.com for links to the book, to more poetry, and everything in my world, including paintings. Thanks for all of the love and support over the years, and please dig the words.